Hey, how we doing out there, guys? So welcome back to another episode of the Bastion Black Performance Podcast. I finished up my episode the other day, kind of my first episode, talking a little bit about parts of my first deployment preceding the Battle of Fallujah in late 2004, and kind of some of the details around that. And this is going to kind of be the second episode in that vein. So I kind of initially had intended to sort of move into the battle like more quickly, but I actually think, although this may be exactly the kind of thing I hate when authors do it in books, but I think I'm going to spend more time talking about the first deployment and additional things after. So I kind of ended last time in basically the middle of August, TCP 8 there. And so there's additional things that matter as far as my personal experiences with things that came, before and after that on that deployment that were all prior to us actually, taking off and taking part in Operation Phantom Fury, because it has to do with casualties that we took and, the general disposition of my platoon and things like that, and other things that kind of directly affected me and sort of like where and how I ended up. So I think it'll be relevant to talk about that. So, kind of remember last time I sort of ended, talking about experiences, at the traffic control points and, our dealings there. And, so as we finished, at the end of August there, our kind of stint out at the traffic control point, we had to come back into our AO. As I said, our AO is up in this area here, kind of around the Karma area, and I can remember, and I stated this in the other video. I'll end up stating this like 1,000 times before I'm done with however many episodes and stuff it takes me to talk about the Battle of Fallujah, but. For the most part, on my first deployment, I do not have any association for dates whatsoever, with the exception of when people in my unit got killed. And it's the nature of everything was extremely repetitive for us on pretty much every day. It was patrols and IEDs and stuff every single day, or it was standing post at the company's outpost every single day, whatever it happened to be. And so there's basically no way for me to know individual dates. So as I kind of tell some of these additional stories and happenings and things like that, I don't honestly know exactly which ones happened before the other ones, in sequence on that. So don't judge me on like, oh, well, so and so actually got hit before so and so, and it's like, I get it. So as we moved back from TCP 8. My platoon pretty much immediately went back on operations. If you remember, we had, like I said, we more or less had a rotation where, we were supposed to have 2 days, quote unquote, out of every 8 days where we were at battalion and able to, do some sort of, we call it R&R, do some rest and refit where we could, get a little bit of sleep. We'd go out to the range, we'd do training. Usually you might get to make a phone call home, stuff like that. But basically, so we got bumped right back in, and because our AO had essentially been depleted of people, to patrol it, because we were, out, because we were down in this area over here, south of Fallujah, on the south part of Fallujah, we basically had to immediately come back up and do like massive IED sweeps on some of the roads because nobody had swept them in that amount of time, and we hit a lot of IEDs and found a lot of IEDs in my first deployment, and part of the nature of that was the fact that like these are all for the most part like dirt roads in and around here. The main hardball roads, they kind of show up a little bit in obviously on my Google Earth map here, but this main north-south running road I said was Route Chicago. There's kind of this additional one you can see going off over there, and then Lincoln up here. And obviously there are other ones that were like asphalt, what we call like hardball, but the majority of them were dirt roads, which means that they're very easy for people to put IEDs on because you could just bury it anywhere in and around there. So we had to come up to this road and do a specific sweep on this road that runs going this direction. So going east and west is called Route Santa Fe. And I always remember Santa Fe because Santa Fe, there's this crossing over this canal right here that we called Checkpoint 50. And this is, I don't know if it still is, but this was an ice factory. So guys who've been to Iraq know, like you'll go to ice factory and you'll get this like, it'll be like, I don't know, like 6 inches by 6 inches by like 4 feet long blocks of ice. And we would go there and we would get blocks of ice and put them in coolers that we had when we were out on operations. And, so we basically had like a business relationship. We had like a deal with the ice guy, as far as the unit was, so that, obviously they got to make ice, and then we got to have a little bit to try to cool down some of our water and stuff when we were out on patrol. So the road, the Santa Fe, it's a dirt road, and it runs pretty much like, I mean, it goes like to infinity and beyond, as you can kind of see out there. And obviously our AO stopped at some point. I don't honestly know where it stopped, but we we were on Santa Fe a lot, and we got hit with IEDs at checkpoint 50 like all the freaking time. It's just because the nature, like obviously, like one quick look and you can see this is a hell of a choke point. Because you've got Chicago coming back up. So as you're coming from, where Battalion is, which is basically down around here. And so anytime, once you would like try to move back into the city, move into the area, it's like you can see right here, there's a couple choke points, and, you can't really get vehicles across a lot of places down here. Sometimes there's smaller crossings, like I kind of talked about last time, where like they literally will just fell a palm tree or put like one or two palm trees kind of butted up to each other, and some of those. But for the most part, you want to cross the canal as you go over the main road. So they said IEDs there all the time. And then now you're going to ask, you're like, oh, well, they said IEDs up there all the time. Why didn't you just observe it? And it's like, we did. And I swear, I don't believe in ghosts. I believe that ghosts are like gun regulations. They're not real. We'd have sniper teams out there. We'd have drones. We'd have all sorts of stuff. And I don't know, like ghosts or somebody put IEDs out there, because we still hit IEDs there. But so I remember specifically we came back from, had to do and it was like an all day long, IED sweep. And I've talked about it in some of my like, kind of small unit tactics related videos. So the way we would IED sweep at the time was we basically sweep in like a V formation. And so, so a V formation is basically the two, so you have one or two people who are, very close to each other, but then as you look forward going out, it spreads out in a V. Obviously, it's a V formation, right? So the people who are in the front are both the furthest ahead and the furthest out to the side or out to the flanks. And the idea being that, so for example, if you see my cursor here, so let's say we're IED sweeping in this direction here. So the two people that were like next to the road would be here, but the V would spread out like this. So theoretically, the guys who were out here should have already swept up or spooked off or shot or whatever any IED triggermen. So like obviously if you have an IED triggerman here, the road would be, here that he would be looking at, but the people who are actually on the road would be further back here. So the idea was, it was a reasonably sound idea for the technology that we had available at the time and for the IEDs that we typically ran into. Because at the time, IEDs were primarily command detonated by an actual like attached wire. Like it was very common to have like speaker wire attached to the IED, and they would have a motorcycle battery like in a bush, and a dude would literally just touch the contacts and go bzz, and that's how they would set off IEDs. Kind of initially, and they were starting to get into like the electronically command detonated ones and stuff, but still by far the most common ones were just like literally just a hard line connected to it. So obviously the idea, being the guy who's the furthest forward and whatever should flush that guy out, and so one. The guys by the road should be somewhat safe, and then we would literally just like look at the ground and kick the ground. And occasionally we might have like an engineer with us with a metal detector, but that was somewhat of a rarity. It was not the norm anyways. And so we had to IED sweep like the whole freaking thing. And like the reason I remember it specifically, because one, it was just physically exhausting, but like this was before I had discovered compression shorts, and I'm kind of a big old thick boy whose legs rub together. And I remember I had the absolute worst case of crotch rot I've ever had, and obviously there's nothing you can do about it. Like you can't just be like, hey, I don't think I should go on patrol because my legs rub together and I got a rash. It's like you don't have any options like that. So it's just like I just walked really bow-legged for a few days, and I actually the next time I got a chance to talk to my parents, I asked my mother to send me some Under Armour compression shorts, and so she sent me like 3 pairs, and those have changed my entire life, and there is absolutely no question about that. But so again, without trying to remember or define specific dates, so we had a couple of incidents that happened on and around checkpoint 50 or Santa Fe. So one in particular, and the reason why these are important is because these attrited my platoon. And kind of, started to knock our numbers down a little bit. So one incident that we had at checkpoint 50 up here. So like I said, my company, we were positioned at a schoolhouse, which was up by the traffic circle. right up here. So there's a traffic circle. You see right here. There used to be, it got blown up, so I don't know what's in its position now, but there used to be basically somewhere roughly around here along this canal, there was a schoolhouse. And this is just a little dirt road. And so my company was based out of that. Then at some point, we moved down into what they called the Delta ING compound. And so the Delta ING compound was somewhere over in, I mean, it was on the west side of the road. I don't remember exactly how far south it was. It might even have been this, like down here, because we were kind of across from like a construction area. So it might, like this might be the construction area we were across from, and this might actually be the Delta ING compound right here. You know what? I actually think that is. It actually even looks roughly similar. So I think this is the Delta ING compound that we're kind of based out of. So we had Iraqi, like Iraqi National Guards. We had Iraqi National Guard guys with us, and the idea was that like now instead of having 2 Marines on post, you would have like a Marine and an ING guy, except for the entry control points. You would still have like, you know, a couple Marines out there. And you know, the idea was supposed to be one that would help us like not be quite as exhausted, but also like, you know, trying to work them into the war effort. And they were just the shadiest people I've ever been around in my whole life. And it was like the only ones who had to stay there overnight were the guys who had to stand post overnight. All the other ones would go home. And it was like, and they were supposed to report, you know, supposed to have like 0700 or 0800 report, whatever it was. And if they didn't show up in the morning, then we would get attacked immediately at 8. And then as soon as the attack was over, they would all show up. So it's like they knew what was going on. But so when we were based at the Ding, we had our QRF, like I said, you know, so usually you had, you know, a platoon that was standing the wire, so the perimeter positions, platoon on QRF, a platoon on operations, and a platoon who was theoretically on, you know, R&R or other things. But it's very common we'd have to stand up secondary or tertiary QRF because the QRF was out doing something. And so then they'd basically just gobble up whatever bodies were laying around and were not on post at the time. And that's what happened in this particular instance. So we're basically like tertiary QRF. So they come in and it was in the morning. The sun was just starting to come up. And so they kind of, you know, gobbled up only like 8 or 10 of us. There wasn't very many. We had 2 Humvees, maybe it's 3 Humvees. We only had a couple Humvees that were still left. And they said, hey, we got reports, you know, we need to do an IED sweep down by checkpoint 50. And so, and we were guys from like multiple different platoons and stuff like that. You know, we were kind of just like all the people who were like not standing post that exact moment. So, so I get put on with that. And so I get put on, you know, in a gun truck. It's got a Mark 19 on it. So we, as we're moving up, we, you know, so we get set up to come up here and you know, so we get set up in our like V formation and start working up there. And as you can see, one of the very severe issues with having to do basically just a physical search for IEDs is the fact that you come to like a bridge, which is one, it's a natural choke point, which is why they would try to put IEDs there, because obviously you know, you can only go across a fairly narrow area, and typically you kind of have to slow down as well. But also it means that, you know, you can't have your V like cross over here unless it's a really small canal. So your V has to break down and go across the very thing that they're trying to sweep for IEDs. So you lose whatever, you know, you think you're doing with that. So we basically get dismounted. You know, we get up here, like I said, I'm in a vehicle. And so we have the vehicles basically right on the road, and we're essentially the inside of the V. And I'm the you know, the first vehicle. And so we had, I think it was only one other Humvee with us, but anyways, there was a troop carrier one that was behind us. So we're basically right here and we're creeping up. We got a couple guys, you know, up here. We get right up to the bridge and boom, IED goes off. And so I'm standing up tall in the turret, IED, like, you know, bunch of gravel, shrapnel, whatever it was, you know, hits the windshield, hits the gun shield, hits me in, you know, kind of the face and the goggles and stuff like that. And basically immediately I hear like screaming and like somebody screaming bloody murder. And so there's one of our guys is wounded, and he's kind of he's basically right here on the like on the side of the road, and you can see that his femur is fractured. Because you can kind of, like when you're looking at it, like obviously if you see someone whose knee's bent at 90 degrees, well, this guy looks like he has 2 knees because it's bent. And so as soon as this goes off, big cloud of dust, can't really see anything. And then to my left, which would be over in this area here, I start hearing pop, 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 pop. You know, so I yell out like, you know, contact left, swing the gun over there, but there's dust, so I can't see anything to do. Then I hear this guy screaming, and and so he's kind of like in a little bit of a just like a depression or like a hole that's kind of there by the side of the road, not the where the IED was buried, just another one that was there. And he's holding his. I'm trying to see if you guys can visualize this. So his right leg is the one that is broken. He has his left foot under his right foot, and he's like supporting the weight with that while he's laying on his back because obviously like his freaking femur shattered, right? Looks like a baseball bat broken in half. And he's screaming. And so there's one of the guys who's with us, a guy by the name of Kenny. He's kind of crawling on the ground, and he screams out to this guy by the name of Bailey. And he's like, Bailey, put your leg down, you're gonna get your leg shot. And so Bailey was starting to bring it under control. Like after the first couple of seconds of kind of like yelling, he got himself under control, and was kind of like just like making some low like noises. And again, this just goes by in a matter of like a few seconds, right? And so he listens to Kenny like yelling at him to put his leg down, and when he lets his leg drop, he just lets out the most like scream, because obviously, and so so Kenny goes, "Okay, Bailey, put your leg back up," and like just so it's kind of like that was basically him saying, "Oh, that's my bad. If it hurts that bad, just like keep your leg up there." So then. So as I'm sitting there, like looking like in this direction down here, so my Humvee's basically parked, basically like right there, and so my squad leader, Corporal Kruger, comes running over, and he goes, Grease, if you see a dude step back out with a white man dress on, smoke him. I go, okay. As soon as he says that, guy with a white man dress like pops back out, kind of like right back there. Turn to Mark 19, loose over there, and handle business with that, and so Kruger kind of runs off behind the Humvee, and well, it's like not behind, but beside. So he's basically over here. So over here we have another guy by the name of Salazar who got hit with a piece of frag that went through his flak jacket, like kind of above his nipple, like on the sort of the peripheral part of his pec, and like down into his chest, like into his lung. Like it was like a sucking chest wound with a piece of like frag. And so he's kind of, and the road is slightly raised up here. So he's kind of laying down there. And so our corpsman, Doc McAfee's over there, like trying to work on him. And again, and this guy is making anyone who's ever like killed or seen like a baby rabbit get killed or wounded, like the scream that they make is the most horrifying scream you've ever heard in your life. And this guy kind of makes a noise like that, and it's like, I can't blame the dude. Like I've never had a huge piece of frag go through my flak jacket and down into my chest. So, I try to withhold judgment as best I can on that. And so he's like, he's kind of yelling. He's like, Salazar, shut the fuck up. Salazar, shut the fuck up. Because he's trying to work and trying to get stuff done, but obviously you got this guy freaking out kind of in front of you. And so at one point he just reaches out, whack, slaps him in the face and says, shut the fuck up. So he kind of shuts up and sort of gets himself under control. And so I'm kind of still here, I'm still looking down. I kind of, don't know exactly what's going on, but I'm our main, protection at this point, just because one, we didn't have very many dismounts. Like I said, we might have had 8 guys with us total, maybe not even. And I'm our main firepower. And now we have 2 casualties for sure. So multiple people working on them. And then so my fire team leader was another guy who came, who got pulled out with us, a guy by the name of Thompson. And so he was basically up on the bridge, more or less, like going across it. Piece of shrapnel basically skipped right off the ground and then went right across his ankle bone. So it was one of those it didn't hit him in the ankle and go in kind of thing. It basically sliced him like a sword right across there, ripped his boot open, sliced his ankle open, kept going. So he had a pretty good little, his ambulatory wound, he was still on his feet, but limping really good. He had a good slice across there. So he was kind of limping and doing stuff up on the bridge, like stopping vehicles and kind of taking care of things like that. And so, now we're kind of in the hey, now we got to start executing CASEVAC, figure out what's going on. And like I said, we're basically the tertiary QRF. So, this is completely hobbled together, personnel and vehicles and everything else. So while this is kind of going on, my my squad leader, Corporal Kruger, kind of comes back over to me, and mind you, like he was on his second enlistment, and so I was on my first enlistment. So we guys have been in the military, like I understand. It's like we weren't like friends, you know. And he comes over, he's like, Grease, Grease, Grease. I'm like, yes, Corporal. And he goes, man, I tried to give Salazar a shot of morphine, but I had the wrong end in my hand. I stabbed myself in the hand with the morphine. So it's like guys who have used morphine syringe know is they're basically like the ends are color coded, you know. So you put the correct end like against, you know, your palm, and then you just, you know, just kind of stab the dude, and then the, you know, the needle pops out. And he was trying to be helpful with like, you know, like with our corpsman, and you know, he's like, what can I do? And he's like, oh, I'll give him a shot of morphine. So he just basically held it backwards, and when he jammed him, he stabbed himself with it. I don't know if he actually ended up like, you know, injecting any morphine into himself or not, but like he came over and like was telling me that, and thought it was awful funny, and I thought it was pretty comical too. So so we kind of, you know, we sort of get things under control. We get guys loaded up to Casevac them, and obviously we have to put both these guys, you know, in the troop carrier Humvee. And so we basically turn, and we basically bolt right down Chicago, you know, heading back towards Michigan over here. So like I said before, this is Camp Fallujah down here. I was kind of like uncertain when I was talking in my other video, but now that like I have a second to look at it and don't feel like pressured to know instantly because I'm talking on video, this is definitely has to be Camp Fallujah down here, because this is like you know, this is where like 3-5 and before them 2-1 were based out of, like it's like the Habanilla Lakes or whatever. Anyway, it's like a little lake resort thing, but that's where one of the battalions was based out of. But so obviously, so we have to come down. So like I said, we were right here, so we have to come down Chicago, down to here, and so this whole thing, it also crosses railroad tracks. There you go. So it crosses railroad tracks down here, and it's like a really long, like overpass, like kind of bridge, and so normally when you get to bridges, you stop before the bridge, you send 2 guys out, one on each side, and they run along the entirety of the bridge and clear it for IEDs, and then once they clear it, then you send the vehicles across. Well, you know, so we got a couple badly wounded guys, so basically we can't, you know, so we don't stop or anything, so we just bolt, like coming down here, you know, come across the bridge, and as we're going up and over the bridge, my vehicle dies. And so what it was is that when the IED went off, whether it was frag or whether it was rocks or whatever it was, something came up, busted like the radiator and something else. It was leaking a bunch of stuff. So as we go to try to make it over this bridge that goes over the railroad tracks, dies, won't run anymore. And now that I say that out loud, we had to have had 3 vehicles because we got towed by one of them, I think. Anyways, like I said, I'm trying to piece this stuff together 20 years later. So we basically tell the vehicle that's got the casualties, hey, just go on without us. So we're staying there, and we either had a vehicle with us or we had to call out an additional one. That I don't remember. So we're basically just here by ourselves. And so there's only a couple of us there, you know, which, you know, in hindsight is like kind of funny because we're like, oh, don't worry, I guess the 4 of us will just hang out here by ourselves, you know, in a very hot spot area. So we send them ahead, you know, to go to Bravo Surgical, which is in Camp Fallujah. We eventually get someone to tow us, and the only thing we had to tow was like a regular, like a rope. We didn't have a tow bar or like a legit chain or tow strap. We literally just had a rope, which I'm very certain was not, you know, tow rated for something as heavy as a Humvee, especially as heavy as a Humvee with some armor on it. But so we finally, you know, we eventually, you know, like get back to there and get the guys back to surgical. You know, so basically, so 2 of those guys ended up getting evacuated. And, you know, so they were gone for that entire deployment. And then, so my fire team leader who got hit in the ankle, he was out for a while, but he came back, you know, so he was back with us before, or, you know, by the time we went into Fallujah. But so that was kind of, you know, some attrition right there, you know, a couple guys in the platoon, you know, for no more time than that really took. You know, and like I said, we hit IEDs a lot on checkpoint 50. We had, our machine gun section hit one, you know, in that area, and had multiple guys get really severely wounded and, you know, have to get evacuated and miss the Battle of Fallujah, which will become important later on, you know, as to why I ended up in machine gun section for a stretch of time in Fallujah. But so kind of continuing on with other some other things that kind of attrited the platoon and other instances goings on with my first deployment there. So like I said, that was at this checkpoint 50. So we had another incident, and again, I don't remember if it was before or after, where we were going down this road here, so going down Santa Fe. And we didn't get very far down. We basically got right down here, and I was in the back of a troop carrier Humvee. And so there was 4 of us back there, myself and my fire team leader, another guy in my fire team by the name of Solberg, and then a guy in first squad named Rodriguez. So like I said, our first squad were the vehicle guys. So anytime that we were out on operations in vehicles, first squad manned the vehicle. So they either drove them, they manned the guns that were in the back or in the turret, and then they were like the A drivers, the assistant drivers, stuff like that. So there's 4 of us in the back, and we're driving down Santa Fe. Boom. My Humvee drives right over an IED. Goes off like right under the basically the passenger side rear tire that I'm kind of sitting next to. And it didn't rung my bell. Like, I mean, it was loud, but it wasn't anything like, oh my gosh. But so like as we're going down, so you can kind of see like how we're set up here. So we had to have been somewhere. So this like dirt road runs down and around here. So we had to have been somewhere basically in like this area down there. We weren't super far down, but so somewhere down in this area here. I want to say we're kind of closer to this like Palm Grove area. I'm just trying to remember, a little bit of what it looked like. But so we get, so it explodes. And there's just dust, and like obviously like just the nature of the kind of ground and stuff that they have over there. So like when it blows up and there's like a cloud of dust, like it's a lot of dust and hangs out. So it really affects your vision. So boom, goes off, and it fishtailed the Humvee towards the canal. So we came awfully close to it also knocking us into the canal, which would have been bad. But so we kind of come to a stop like a second or two later. And then I start hearing like pop, 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 pop. People are shooting, including my fire team leader who's sitting on the other side of the Humvee. So he's on the driver's side of the Humvee, and then he's facing out towards the south here, so across the canal. He fires a couple of rounds, and then he turns and he goes, Grease, come here. And he goes, Grease, there's a guy right behind the embankment over there. And he kind of points over there, and so as soon as he like points over there, so I have my saw like kind of ready. And as soon as I look over there, a guy pops himself up, 3-round burst. And the guy looked like he threw himself to the ground. So I was like, boom, all right, freaking smoked that dude. And so then meanwhile, we're kind of getting things like, a little bit figured out. And someone goes, hey, why isn't that Mark 19 going? Because we had a Mark 19 in the back of the Humvee. Well, somebody looks up, and so Rodriguez was knocked unconscious. It was the first of like a bajillion concussions for that poor guy. It reminds me, if you guys have ever seen that like comedy skit of the soccer goalie who goes out to defend against penalty kicks, and he gets kicked in the face by every single one of their penalty kicks, and it ends up like, he saves the day, but he's basically like brain dead at the end. That was unfortunately like this guy, he got concussions all over the place. But so he's unconscious, and then we look, and so then Solberg was also unconscious, and not unconscious, he was just kind of like knocked loopy. And so we're trying to figure things out, so like the shooting kind of stops or whatever. So we end up like, kind of dealing with the casualties and dealing with stuff. So we end up sending a group across. And so I'm trying to like, again, there's no saying that this is what it looked like when I was there. So I don't honestly know, but we sent a group up. I want to say that we had to have been somewhere around this area, because we sent a group up a little bit and crossed a little bit of a foot crossing they could get across. Because this is a somewhat serious canal here. And then they kind of came back to sweep back across there. And so it turns out that the guy that my fire team leader, told me to shoot, when he popped up and I shot him, it hit him like in the stomach and kind of like a little bit, like peripheral, so not like dead center. So it was some combination of getting hit and then him physically throwing himself to the ground. And I thought it was like basically like my rounds like tossed him on the ground. So I thought that like that guy was going to be like totally smoked, but he was not. He was just wounded from that. But so then we ended up having so Solberg ended up getting evacuated for concussion related stuff. So whatever you call that, TBI, CTE related things. So he was in my fire team. So so now my fire team's down a guy, at this point already. And so we're kind of slowly, just kind of having numbers get attrited here. And we had other guys get wounded throughout the time that like were back with us by the time we went into the Battle of Fallujah. So I'm kind of sticking mostly to the ones who had to get evacuated entirely. So that took place on Route Santa Fe. We had another one, which was, again, I don't remember if it was before or after. I'm pretty sure this one was after, but we were up here on Lincoln, and we were relatively close to Chicago. So I want to say that we were somewhere like over and around here, because we were kind of next to some woods, like where we got stopped, or like, some palm groves, or whatever the right way to say it is. So I don't feel like we were this far out over here, but again, it was dark and it's kind of a desolate stretch. So it had just gotten dark, and we were going down this road when we were on operations coming back towards Route Chicago. And so usually when we get on these hardball roads and we were in the Humvees, at this time, our best defense against IEDs was, one, we would drive in the middle of the road so that you have the most amount of standoff from each side of the road. And then we would just have the drivers floor it. An armored Humvee doesn't go super fast, probably 50 miles an hour maybe. But, you have a guy who's got a command detonated IED, and, especially, so basically if you're going really fast, he has, usually they'll set it up and they'll have some sort of mark like, hey, I set the IED up even with this tree or whatever it is. So the guy has some sort of mark he's basically going off of to try to set an IED off. So if you're going really fast, he has to plan and execute very specifically. Because one, he's getting his visual feedback, and then there's some level of delay from when he hits, send on the phone, or when he touches the wires to the motorcycle battery, or whatever it happens to be. It's not an instantaneously instant, right? So there's some sort of delay. So it's very tough for the guy to have to plan that. So our best defense on like the major hardball roads is we just have them, floor it, just go really fast. So we're cruising down here, and it had just gotten dark. So it's like, it's nighttime. Like the sun is not up at all, but it had just gotten dark. Cruising down here, and my Humvee again, boom, big explosion. I was kind of sitting in the same place. I was on the passenger side in the back of the troop carrier Humvee. It was myself, my fire team leader, Thompson, and then we had Doc McAfee in the back with us. And that might have been it might have just been the three of us in the back. I can't remember if there's anyone else back there, but boom. Turns out it was a daisy chain one. So there was like two different like IEDs, 155 like artillery shell IEDs. And they set it off a little bit too soon. So they set it off like right in front of my Humvee, and then the other one was in front of that and went off in between us and the next Humvee. So they again, they misjudged it. So, which definitely helped us. So as soon as it goes off, boom. And I was, it was loud, but I was fine. Like Thompson was fine. Doc McAfee was like, he was kind of like, he was unconscious. Like he kind of had his head down. And so Thompson was like, he's like, Grease, look at Doc. He's like, what do we do? And I was like, I don't know, wake him up. So he kind of tries to shake him up, tries to shake him by the shoulder. He's like, Doc, wake up. Nothing. And so he's like, what do we do? So I kind of just reached over and I was like, whack. Just like smacked him in the face with my hand real quick. And so he kind of snapped back too. And so that ended up it was kind of a long story. We ended up sending some guys out to go sweep through the brush and whatever. And they ended up bringing what we called a PUC. So a person under custody, person under containment, i.e. a POW, but it's not a POW. So they ended up bringing one of those back to our Humvee. So we had the three of us plus the PUC in the back there. So then we drove all the way back to Camp Fallujah. So Doc McAfee's out, with concussion stuff, and he gets evacuated, and we drop the PUC off and all that sort of stuff. So now we're down, a couple of additional dudes. So just trying to think of who all had been evacuated by this point that I, have kind of discussed. So you had, in my squad, you had Solberg, you had Doc McAfee, you had, Bailey and Salazar. Were evacuated on that. So we're kind of getting, getting trimmed down just by that. And this is just my platoon in general, so obviously other platoons had problems as well. And I don't even presume to know, who got hit when and how from them. There's only one of them that I know specifically because it was like the very first attack that we ever had on us. And it, one of the machine gunners got severely wounded and evacuated, and so machine gun section for us took a pretty substantial hit, casualty wise. And this is going to be kind of out of place here, but one thing I forgot to mention in the last video when I talked about how Because of our mission at this particular time, we were just operating as if we were 4 rifle platoons, even though obviously we have a weapons platoon. But another thing that we did, and I kind of forgot about this, was each platoon basically gave up a few of their 0311 riflemen to weapons platoon, and then weapons platoon gave up an equal number of guys to come to the rifle platoons to kind of balance them out a little bit better, because obviously it's not that the weapons guys are not like perfectly good regular infantrymen, but they specialize in machine gunnery, in the small rocket assaultman stuff or the mortar stuff, so they're not as up on like the strictly 0311 related stuff, particularly in like the training prior to the deployment. So we had a couple of them or a few of them in our platoon, and we gave a couple or a few guys, to them to kind of balance them out. So that was, also kind of another thing with that. And then when we actually went into Fallujah, then basically everybody went back to their parent platoon, because weapons platoon then became like an actual like standard conventional war weapons platoon, in which each section of the different weapons were then chopped out to the platoons, as attachments on that. So that was another thing that I had forgotten to mention in the last video. Because it's one of those, and the reason I remembered it was when I was walking around, I was trying to write a list of all of the guys in my platoon who actually made it to the end of deployment and left from Iraq with us to go back home. Just because we suffered a lot of casualties. And, every time I would kind of think of a name, I'd be like, oh, crap, no, that guy was there, but that dude was a machine gunner. Oh, no, that dude was an assault man, or whatever. So I just kind of thought I would, bring that back up again. So, interesting, incidents with that as far as, casualties go. And that was kind of the course of events for us, like while we were around Karma. Like we got hit with a lot of IEDs. We would get hit really regularly with mortar rounds or rockets at our firm base. Primarily, it would just be like a couple mortar rounds or a couple rockets, and we took casualties from that. We had a guy. I can't remember if he got evacuated from it. We had a guy in first squad. Reed. Reed got hit with some shrapnel like in the chest, and so he was out for a little while. And we had a couple other guys get like minor wounds from stuff, and things from that. So we had multiple guys in my squad, including my squad leader, got hit with a rocket that hit one of the bunkers on top of the, so it'd be on top of the 4-story schoolhouse we were in, and wounded a couple of them. And so they were out for a little bit and came back, prior to the start of the Battle of Fallujah. So we kind of had taken, lots of casualties with that. And it was just like, and we also didn't really do a lot of shooting at people, because that was just the nature of what was going on with that. So that kind of really, really sucked. It definitely made us really sour and really like itching for some legit action prior to Fallujah. So, maybe I'll sort of like regale like one more, kind of funny tale from this sort of time, and then we'll kind of work our way back towards getting ourselves close to the actual assault here. So we had one of the funny kind of days, and there's I always kind of hold this out. Like I am by in no way, shape, or form like a quote unquote pro veteran guy or a blanket pro veteran guy. I don't really give a shit about that. I care about what an individual does, his individual mindset, his action, his training, his skill, and that's still the way that I judge people. Currently, obviously being a very serious competition shooter and a very serious Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, because I don't believe in giving people credit just because they belong to an organization. And so one thing I kind of bring up when it comes to people using combat experience, oh, hey, he's got combat experience, he could teach this class or whatever. And so it's like, one, you have to judge like, well, okay, what constitutes combat? I mean, the vast majority of people who ever went to Iraq or Afghanistan, the quote unquote combat they got in was like the fob they were at got hit with indirect fire, or a convoy they were in got hit with an IED. Like the actual number of like legit door kickers who have seen an enemy up close and have shot at or shot an enemy up close is a drop in the Pacific Ocean, when it comes to that. So I'm always really, really hesitant, or I basically give people no credit for that stuff, without knowing specific details. And I hold myself to the same standard. So, some of the engagements or some of the people that I've shot or whatever are like funny stories or like just, interesting stories, I think. But there's only kind of really two that I think actually for me sort of say something about myself, and like, for me, I find to be like a personally positive thing in relation to like survivability. And one was, it's kind of, I mean, I think it's a funny story, but we were somewhere way out in this like reed jungle. I don't have any idea where. Way the hell out there. And so as a saw gunner on my first deployment, we had just sort of implemented the, like inner outer cordon, like search stuff. So we searched a lot of houses or, farms and stuff. Because obviously you take one look at the environment around here and you can tell there's a lot of farms. So we were on a lot of, those kinds of properties. And so every time we went to like search a vehicle, so you have an outer cordon, or search a vehicle, pardon me, to search like a property or to search a building or a house or something like that. So you have an outer cordon, and the outer cordon, it's obviously on the outside, and the outer cordon keeps people who are outside out. Then you have an inner cordon who face towards the building or towards the objective, and the inner cordon keeps people that are inside in, and then you have the actual people who go to do the entry, and obviously they go inside. And so as a saw gunner, I was always on outer cordon. So I never like got to go into a single house ever, like on patrol or on mission, until until we went to Fallujah. And so, there's things where like, you try to not make yourself sound like you're a whiny bitch, but you definitely, every one of us, and myself included, has definitely been a whiny bitch at times and still continues, unfortunately. But there are always things that kind of like, things that just really irritate you. And it's such a stupid thing, but it's like, man, like sometimes like I just want to be the guy to go inside the freaking house and look around, even if there's nothing in there, it's like being put on outer cordon is like, it's basically like, in all the movies where they're about to have a big battle and like the old king comes out or whatever, they're like, all right, I want to go with you guys. And they're like, well, actually, sir, like, we need you to stay and protect the children in case they get past us. It's basically like a, hey, we don't fucking need you or want you with us, so we need you to go over here, And so this was, and this was one where it kind of actually worked out in a funny way. So we're out in this area of like, farmland, and right around this, like, I call it like a reed sea. So, if I had to guess, I want to say we were somewhere like over in this area here, because it was just like, there were like some small dirt roads, but they were just like endless, like sea of reeds, like all over the place. So, we're probably somewhere in like that area there, but honestly, I don't really know. But, so we're going to go, hey, for whatever reason, they wanted us to do like some searches of like these kind of specific houses in this little sort of like, kind of sub neighborhood. So we get out of the Humvees, and they leave the Humvees there in like a little, patrol base. And then my squad takes off, and then they kind of come over the radio, and they said, and we, all of a sudden, we hear like 240 go off. And at the time, the Marine Corps, we had the 240 Golf. The 240 Golf has adjustable firing rates, and on the fast rate, you fire 850 to 950, as a cyclic rate. And 950 rounds a minute, like, it sounds a little mean. Like, when that sucker goes off. And so we hear like, brat, brat, like a few bursts go off, and we're like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, hey, first squad's got contact with some guys with weapons that are kind of moving around the vehicles. And we're like, oh, okay. So we go to set up, kind of around this house. And so again, they're like, oh, Grease, you're going to be outer cordon over there. So I am literally standing by myself. And somehow I ended up being the only guy on outer cordon. I don't know what they were doing or like how they had it split up, but somehow Lance Corporal Grease is the only dude on outer cordon over here next to this like kind of house. And I'm not super close to the house. I'm probably 50, 60 yards from the house, and I'm literally just kind of standing out in like the middle of a dirt field. And I'm looking towards the west because the sun is starting to set. So so as I'm looking towards the west, like all of a sudden I get snap, snap, snap. 3-round burst goes right past me. And, so when you're getting shot at, and there's kind of like a couple specific sounds that you get. So like when a round goes past you and it's snapping, it means it's close, and it means it's fired in your direction. But like snap doesn't necessarily mean it's fired like at you specifically. But so I get snap, snap, snap. And I'm the only person out there, so I'm pretty sure they're shooting at me anyways. But so I was like, ah, shit. And so I start looking to the west, and I kind of start walking, like towards the house, like just kind of slowly walking, because like I feel like, hey, I just shouldn't stand. I shouldn't just not move. So kind of like walking towards the house, and then I kind of get like I get 3 rounds, just that like zipping sound. And when you get that like real tight zipping sound, like those are ones that are going right past you. So whoever it was shot at me. 3-round burst, and then shot at me with another 3-round burst, and got closer. And I was like, okay. So I looked to the west, and I kind of looked down there, and I've got my saw, like, we call it like the chicken wing. So I've got my stock like under my armpit, and then I'm kind of looking over my sights, which is kind of a, in the manual, it's kind of a classic, like assault position, but I really like it for, like automatic rifles and stuff like that. But so I look straight down this dirt road that's in front of me, and I see two dudes down there, and one of them like kind of turns right at me, like, and I see an AK like clear as day. So I light off a burst, like 7-round burst, brat, and it hits low, kind of hits right in the dirt road. Like, my horizontal alignment's good, vertical alignment's too low because I've got it in the chicken wing, right? So as soon as I fire that one, it hits the dirt, immediately just correct and make another, about 7-round burst. Walk straight into one of the guys, boom, falls into the ditch back there. And, and I could hear him like screaming, and he's probably 200 yards away. And so I go sprinting down this road. And so as I go, because I'm under the assumption that I'm still in contact. I just had two guys with weapons right down there in the ditch, and I wounded one of them at least for sure. So I'm going to go down there, and try to, locate, close with, and destroy as per my mission. And so I go running down this road, and as I'm running down, I run into my squad leader. So my squad leader is like out in kind of like a field over there doing something. He's like, Grease, did you get him? And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go down there and check it out. And he goes, good, go get him. So I take off running down there, and so then I run into one of our Marines that was he was a weapons platoon guy, and he was the guy who like babysat the Iraqi special forces guys who were attached to us. So as we go running down there, he says, hey, I've got two of these guys down there, and like, be careful. And I was like, okay. Or he's like, watch out for him. I'm like, okay. So we go running down there, and he's kind of like running with me, and we both kind of like slowed down and like looked at each other, and I was like, you got two guys with AKs down there who nobody knew were down there, and I just got shot at by an AK and shot a guy with an AK. We're like, oh crap. So we go down there, and by the time we get down there, one of the Iraqi guys is pulling the other one out of the ditch, and it turned out I hit him like right square in the knee, and so I was dragging him out of there, and so we ended up like evacing that guy or whatever. He was wounded, but not it was a leg wound, so it was survivable. But so basically, what it turned out that it was is that nobody had briefed us that we had any sort of additional units out there. And these guys didn't wear the same uniforms as us, the same helmets. They didn't carry the same weapons, had no idea they were there. And somebody from where they were standing shot multiple bursts at me and was adjusting their fire on me. So, so I did what anyone would do. I got PID on the guys standing where the rounds were coming, and, fired a couple bursts and, put one of the guys down. And so that, I kind of think it's a hilarious story, but it was kind of a big cluster, just as far as that goes, because it's one of those where like you always have these things kind of happen in war. Friendly fire is always a huge deal, but it's also like it's one of the incumbent problems that we then had to like try to fix, and all units have this problem, which is that like within your own organic unit, it's relatively easy to keep tabs on people, because you're like, hey, you have assigned areas of operation. So if you go outside of that, you have to let somebody know that you went outside of it. So for example, where India Company's area of responsibility was, and Kilo Company's area of responsibility had hard delineations, which means that if you're India Company and you're going to move through Kilo Company territory or vice versa, they have to be told beforehand. That way they know. And so then you add on top of this where they wanted to start integrating these Iraqi like indigenous troops in with us. And so they have, different color uniforms. They have different weapons. Obviously they don't, most of them don't speak English or don't speak very much English. And then they have somebody who's not, organic to our own platoon. It definitely caused problems with that, because it's like, in that particular instance, it's like you take a totality of the facts that you have available for you and make a decision, and then then in hindsight you have to be like, well, okay, here's how this went terribly. And this would definitely turn out to be a problem, like for other units and for us, like later on in Fallujah when we had Iraqis attached to us as well. But the thing I kind of took away from that, like I said, is that that was a rare instance where I was completely by myself and engaged. And I mean, I could have dropped down prone. I could have sprinted towards the building and, not engaged initially and then tried to figure out what was going on. But, I basically, for me, I thought, I was happy with myself because it was like, hey, you definitely had reasons that you didn't just turn and get back involved, but I did. So it was like, hey, and it's also like being a young guy in the military. One thing that happens that's really bad is the military tends to breed a lot of aggression and initiative out of you when you're a young guy, when you're a low level guy, because one, obviously you're stupid because you're young and you're fairly untrained and stuff like that. So you tend to, they tend to basically breed it into you that you're always waiting for, orders. You have to wait for somebody to tell you where you can go, and you have to, you sleep where they tell you to sleep, and you eat what they tell you to eat, and all these things. But then the flip side of that coin is that they also want you to be someone who can be semi-autonomous and make your own, decisions when the time comes for it, like under stress, and exercise initiative. And I'll be honest, like not everybody and, not a lot of people are capable of all those things. Like there's an awful lot more people who, if you tell them where to shoot or what to do, they'll absolutely get involved and be completely, useful and effective like partners. But the number of people that you can just, kind of just wind up and turn loose is relatively low. So, so in that way, like I thought, like for me, that was kind of a formative, event because I was like, hey, like, with no supervision and no one to tell me anything otherwise, like I kind of made decisions and, exercised like, quick initiative for that. Now, obviously the situation was kind of fucked, but that's unfortunate. That's the way that the way she goes sometimes. But so that kind of so that's sort of the last kind of funny story or story kind of working out of that. So like I said, we're basically getting into the now we're kind of get to the sort of like September, October kind of time frame. The one thing that I know time frame. So to kind of back up. So I told the story about when we hit the IED. On Route Santa Fe, and a guy from my fire team, ended up getting evacuated for concussion-related stuff. That one I know for a fact was late October of 2004, because my ear's been ringing ever since that IED. My left ear's been ringing ever since that one, and it was before the Battle of Fallujah. So I want to say it was probably 2 weeks before the Battle of Fallujah, so we still had to control the AO and still had to do the regular stuff out there. Now, at some point, we had moved from the Delta ING compound and we moved back into the battalion's firm base. So wherever we're at, somewhere down in this area here. So I'm assuming this is probably the battalion firm base back there. So we moved back down to the battalion firm base. We're actually, in my company, we just got this short end of the stick kind of the whole time. But so the battalion, obviously they had a compound and it had, walls and then buildings and everything inside of it. So they had perimeter and entry control points and all that stuff set up. So they moved the companies back there basically to kind of rest, refit, and to sort of get stuff in line for the Battle of Fallujah. Now, we didn't really know why at the time, as junior Marines. There's like, there was scuttlebutt going around the whole time. My assumption is when they sent us over there in June, they sent us over there with the intention of us assaulting Fallujah within a couple of months or within a few months. But obviously we didn't know. And then, as we kind of got pulled back there and the stuff was kind of, it was getting close to the election, like America's election, if you remember, that was, when they reelected George Bush. And so politics obviously plays into that. So when we moved back there, then the rumors really started swirling. It's like, hey, I hear we're invading, Fallujah like tomorrow and like all these things. And then they kind of started like bringing out like, more ammo, more gear and kind of stuff like that. And then it was kind of like, okay, so now something's definitely going on. So I'll kind of finish up this episode with basically getting, kind of us getting ready and getting up to basically November 7th when we took off. So we're based at the battalion firm base, but my company, we actually had to be outside of the perimeter because we were the only ones they didn't have room for. There's this building that sat out there and it kind of had like a little parking lot around it or whatever. But so the way that screwed us over is that we were inside of the exterior like observation posts for the battalion, but we were outside of the exterior walls. So we had to set up posts and man posts and stand post out there. Whereas like basically everybody else got to be inside of the battalion firm base, which meant when they were there, they could sleep anytime they weren't doing stuff. Whereas like we still had to be man in post. So that frickin' sucked. So while we're out here kind of getting things ready, we got a couple of additional vehicles given to us, and we started, like basically just kind of like fixing things. And it was at this point that I basically got attached to machine gun section. And the way that this came about was, like I said, machine gun section had taken a lot of casualties, like from one IED in particular, I think most of them came from. But I was also really good friends with some of the machine gunners, and I had wanted to be an 0331, like when I went to infantry school. And they always told us that, hey, you get your wish list. You get to put 3 MOSs you want, and they'll give you they'll try to give you the one you want. Well, I never got any of that. I just got there. They said, hey, you got to be 0311. And so they were really low on numbers. And, I kind of wanted to, I'd wanted to be in machine gun section before anyways. And so then they basically kind of, the company kind of like basically asked around. They're like, hey, machine gun section is so short that they can't be machine gun section. Do we have anyone that could augment with them? And then so it kind of got basically like, asked around, and I got asked. They're like, hey, is there anybody who wants to be a machine gunner and, anyone who knows how to use 50 cal Mark 19 240? Because like in the Marine Corps infantry, I think this is a big, problem that we had is like we never cross-trained on like the 50 cal and the Mark 19 as 0311s. We did, like everybody got to fire a couple of bursts, like my second deployment, like in the middle of deployment on one of the ranges, when we were in Iraq. But, and the 50 cal and the Mark 19 are a little complex to take apart, especially compared, like the 240 is the coolest, simplest thing to take apart ever. And so I had a machine gunner's course when I was in 1st Recon Battalion doing pre-BRC stuff there. And so I was familiar with all of those things. And so, and I said, well, yeah, I'll do it. And they're like, okay, you want to be, attached to a machine gun section? And I said, yeah, sure. So I was like, okay, so I got bumped to a machine gun section. And then, well, and the other part of that was I wanted to get out of my fire team because I was basically certain my fire team leader was going to get me killed for like a bunch of reasons, but just a lot of things that just really pissed me off. As far as like things like ways that he operated is like, I didn't, I won't go into like a ton of details. Like I do think that he's like a legitimately like a good human, and turned out to be like a very effective, like combatant and like low level leader. But everything up until that point on that deployment, so you're still talking like 5 whole months by this point, almost basically 5 whole months. And I was like, I got to get away from this. So I kind of saw my opportunity to get machine gun section, and so. Then, so like initially they're like, okay, so what we're going to do, and this is where I can't even begin to remember exactly all of the stupid stuff that they told us, like how this was going to go down organizationally, because none of it ended up being true. Like initially they basically said, hey, you're going to roll in the 240 is going to be mounted in the back of this Humvee, but then when we stop, like you're going to grab the 240 off and you're going to like, then we're going to run and do dismounted machine gun stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. And, then they're like, well, okay, actually we just got this Humvee in with a turret on it, then we're going to put the Mark 19 on it. So you know how to use the Mark 19? I was like, yeah. And they're like, okay, well, you're going to be on the Mark 19, but then when we stop, like you're going to run out of the Mark 19 turret and you're going to grab the 240 and we're going to go do 240 stuff. And I was like, okay. And then so like basically like, and nobody had any idea like how we were going to do the Battle of Fallujah. Like when we even got like our formal brief, the way that they basically formally briefed us for it when we finally knew that we were going in was they basically briefed, and the way they laid it out, they basically said, hey, Lima Company is going to be, the main effort, and India Company is going to be in vehicles driving stuff back and forth to Lima Company. And we were like, what? that sounds stupid. One, like, why do those guys get to do stuff? Because we've had a way harder deployment thus far. But I was also like, in my head, I'm like, I don't know, Fallujah seems kind of big. Seems kind of big to have a battalion just be like, yeah, we only need one company to do stuff. But that was literally what they briefed us. It was basically like, hey, we're going to be some sort of subsidiary effort and doing this and that, which was obviously not true. But it's like they had like no idea. Like, I don't know. Like when I look back, it's one of the many things I'm disappointed about. Like, in my time in the Marine Corps and just like some of the organizational stuff. That was one of them. It's just like, and I don't know at what level it changed, but whatever they briefed us was none of it was freaking true. But so, anyways, so like, okay, so like being on the vehicle didn't bother me at the time because like, well, if we're on the vehicle, like then I'm going to get more action because if they're basically holding my company, my company back as like some sort of, like reserve effort. And again, none of that ended up being true. And there's just all this like shit floating around. Like, so nobody had any idea like what was going on with that stuff. But so we're at this little, we're our little outcropping from battalion, kind of getting stuff ready. And we were still having to run patrols back in our AO. So like we would be here getting stuff ready, staying there. And then so now we no longer had any elements that were out there, as far as like a, like a firm base or anything like that or a combat outpost. But we still have to send whatever platoon was on operation. We still have to go out there and do patrols and stuff like that. And so it was kind of a cluster of a time, as far as those things go. But so we're basically, kind of getting everything ready. Sort of get get more ammo and start like outfitting the vehicles with, with stuff. And we're just like, we're draping ammo off of this and ammo off of that. And one thing that I remember like very specifically is it was the night, and this will be the last thing I think I have for this episode. So it'll be the night that we took off to set up. So for us, that would have been November 7th, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So we took off. So obviously, my battalion's over here basically. So we took off on the night of the 7th. Went up here. We basically got directed around up over into this area here, and then we spent the entire day of November the 8th somewhere out in this area, because I just remember it was just a desolate, like, desert hellscape. And that was when they were really working the city over with, air power and indirect fire, and they moved reconnaissance elements closer and stuff like that. And then the major invasion, the major attack itself started the morning of the 9th. So it was the 7th, and it was like right around like chow time. And so, like I said, occasionally we would get to go, like when we were back on our quote-unquote R&R cycle, occasionally we would get to come down to Camp Fallujah here and get chow. And Camp Fallujah had like a legit chow hall. Like the food in their chow hall was like actual food. And they always had like, little like, baskets of like chips and like pop and Gatorade and stuff like that. And we never had any of that stuff like around us. So that was like a huge luxury. But so it's the 7th, and it's like right around chow time, and they basically came over and they said, hey, we're gonna load up, a convoy, to go over there for a chow run. If people want to come, we still need to have, vehicle watch. So it's like obviously not everybody can go, but so the way it was set up is so the way you get into like Camp Fallujah is basically just this road here. So this is where our battalion firm base is, and then the entry to Camp Fallujah is basically like right here. So I mean, it's like 2 miles down the road. So they're like, hey, we're gonna take guys over to chow. Anyone wants to go, but every platoon still has to have, their fire watch. So we still have to have watching the vehicles and all the weapons and the equipment and stuff like that. So I had one of the guys in my fire team. So at this point, my fire team was myself, my fire team leader, Thompson, and then Gooch, because Solberg had gotten evacuated. And so Gooch was going to be the driver of the Humvee that I was in with the Mark 19. And so we were out there, and I wanted to go get chow, but it was like either Gooch or myself had to watch the Humvee, and he didn't want to go. He was like, oh, I kind of want to go get chow, and I was like, but I really want to go get chow, and I was like, hey, if you let me go get chow, I'll bring you back a hot plate. And I kind of talked him into it, and he's like, all right, fine, go get chow, bring me back a hot plate. So I managed to get into this convoy, this little group, and get over there to get chow. And they are not allowing anyone to get hot plates because, we just roll in with all these extra dudes. And everyone at Camp Fallujah, for the most part, were all like super pogues. So you're like CBs and construction battalion and stuff like, so people who basically don't do real military jobs. So they're accustomed to wearing like, clean camis, and they get chow multiple times a day, every day, and get to watch TV and stuff like that. Whereas for us, this is a huge luxury. So they wouldn't let us bring any food out of there. So I think I grabbed like a bag of chips or something like that, and I get back and I'm like, Gooch, man, they wouldn't let me grab any food to bring to you. So I have eternally felt both good about my actions and super guilty because I got to get good legit chow on the night that we left for the assault on Fallujah, but I had to do it inadvertently at the expense of my fellow Marine there. So like I said, so that would have been the early evening around chow time, and then later that night was when we took off to position for the Battle of Fallujah. But I will leave this episode there because I think that's a good stopping point. And remember, guys, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back up.